Welcome, everyone, to Gospel Lessons. I'm Kevin Prince. We're doing a series on false traditions, beliefs that we have in the church but aren't based in Scripture or the Gospel. These are things that we often learn in primary, seminary, and even parents, and are passed down from generation to generation. Sometimes false traditions can be relatively harmless, but often they can keep us from a true or deeper understanding of the Gospel. As I thought about doing this series, the person I wanted to help me more than anyone was Bruce Porter. Welcome, Bruce.
Well, thanks for having me with you, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity.
Many of you know Bruce, who earned his bachelor's degree in ancient Near Eastern studies from BYU and went on to receive his master's degree in Middle Eastern studies with an emphasis in Semitic languages. He has studied Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian, Coptic, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and other languages. His graduate coursework was in the history of religions with an emphasis in Egyptian religion and textual studies. He is well known for his research for the church and BYU around the Pearl of Great Price. He has written over 16 books. Bruce and I met on one of his tours in 2018 where he took me and a group to Egypt, Turkey, and Israel, and I can honestly say that it changed my life. So much so that the Gospel Lessons YouTube channel wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for my time with Bruce Porter on those tours, and I mean that literally. I organized a private tour with him in 2020 with a group of friends, and it was also mind-blowing. I consider him my mentor and am honored to call him my friend. Now, if you have never had the opportunity to travel with Bruce, I would highly recommend it. And it so happens that Go and Do Travel has LDS-based cruises, and Bruce often goes as a speaker and tour guide. Imagine traveling with 600 to 800 like-minded faithful LDS folks with Bruce and other LDS speakers and influencers to amazing destinations. I will be going on some of these cruises with Go and Do Travel in the future. One of them that both Bruce and I will be on is Momentum 2026, and I'm excited to spend time with Bruce on that cruise, and I would invite you to come along with us. Be sure to use promo code PRINCE and get $100 off per person. Go and Do Travel is sponsoring this series, but even without that sponsorship, I would encourage anyone to go on a tour with Bruce. Plus, remember that all proceeds of Gospel Lessons, including the Go and Do Travel sponsorship, all go to charity. Now, one of the great things about Bruce is he helps you look at the gospel from a broader or a different perspective, rooted in scripture rather than tradition. Today, I'm honored that Bruce has agreed to do this series on false traditions. Bruce, give us some examples of false traditions and how they evolve over time.
Well, there's two passages of scripture in the Old Testament that says, thou shalt not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. That's really all it says. Well, seethe is just another word for boil. It's Old English for boil. So it says you don't take a baby goat when a mother goat gives birth. You don't take the baby and you take, because the mother goat comes in fresh with milk, and you don't take the baby goat and then milk the mother's goat and then boil that baby's goat in that mother's milk. Now that was a kind of a Canaanite idolatrous tradition of doing that. And so the Lord tells Israel not to see the kid in its mother's milk. Well, that being the law, and we do the same thing in our day and in our time, and with the word of wisdom, we build a fence around that law to make sure we keep that law. So you might build a fence around that to make sure you keep it by saying, well, we shouldn't boil a baby goat in any kind of goat's milk, not just its mother. And to make sure you keep that law, you might say, well, we shouldn't boil a baby goat in any kind of milk, whether it's camel milk or cow milk or goat's milk. And you might build another fence around that law and say, well, we shouldn't boil any kind of meat in any kind of milk. And then you might have another fence around that law to make sure you keep that law. We might have another fence that says, well, we probably shouldn't cook the same meat in this and milk products in the same pots and pans. And then we might build another fence that we should have separate plates as well as pots and pans to consume milk and meat products separately. We might have even go so far, which is true today, to say that we maybe should have two dishwashers, two refrigerators, one for milk products and one for meat products. And even in restaurants today in Israel, You can go into a restaurant and one half of the restaurant will be for milk products and the other half will be for meat products. They even have two separate kitchens in the back in order to keep them kosher so that you don't mix any kind of milk with any kind of meat products. So much so that they have a rule that you should not eat ice cream with your meal or after your meal unless you wait 20 to 30 minutes after a milk product before you eat ice cream or something like that for dessert. They've even developed a ice cream that's not made out of any kind of milk product. It's a petroleum byproduct, like using Vaseline. It melts in your hands, not in your mouth, kind of thing. But it's they've developed that in order to keep the law. So they've built these fences around the law. Well, we have a word of wisdom too. And the word of wisdom is not given by way of commandment nor by constraint, it says. But we have a law that says, hot drinks are not for the body. And so we immediately look for ways to make sure that we keep that hot drinks, that law. And so we start building fences. Now that law, what hot drinks are, is open to an interpretation. And that interpretation has been given to us by our leaders, by our priesthood leaders. And they said that means tea and coffee. Well, then we start looking for other fences around that tea and coffee. And so we say, well, what's in tea and coffee that we need to be afraid of? Well, then it comes down, we say, well, it has to be caffeine. And so we might build a fence around that. Well, we shouldn't have any caffeine drinks, cold or hot, because the fence we've built is a caffeine fence. And so we say, well, we shouldn't have any cold or hot caffeine drinks if caffeine's right. Well, then that leads to other things such as hot chocolate or a good Hershey's bar with almonds or something like that. We start building fences around it. So much so that there's a lot of non-members who think that members of the church who drink a caffeinated drink are breaking the word of wisdom. That tradition has got so strong. I remember years ago in Provo, this was before the church began to expand worldwide so much that if you ate white bread, you were considered not active or not keeping the word of wisdom, and that you had to eat wheat bread, and it had to be not only wheat bread, but you had to grind it on your own magic mill, or you weren't really active, even though there were members of the church all around the world that were eating completely different than we do. And so we have a tendency to build fences around the law. Now, for example, and this is a bad example, but I'm going to use it anyway. If I had a problem of walking across the parking lot, and in that parking lot I found cigarette butts, and I couldn't help myself but pick up those pieces of cigarette and end up smoking it, I might build a fence around that word of wisdom about tobacco, that I don't walk across parking lots, because that would be breaking the word of wisdom if I couldn't help myself but pick up those cigarette pieces.
No, you're exactly right. Like, we look at that example of going back to the Old Testament from Exodus, where you said, and, what is it, 4,000 years since then, they have these fences, and we say, oh my gosh, that's so ridiculous. But us in 200 years have done not only the same thing, but I would say even making it equal in like 1/20th of the time. I'll give you an example. I'm on my mission years and years ago, and we tracked into this woman's house. She opens the door, and we introduce ourselves. She goes, I know who you are. You guys can't even drink Coke. And keep in mind, I grew up in a family where my grandparents, there was no caffeine in their house. There was no playing cards. There was, that kind of a thing. But my favorite drink is Dr. Pepper. And, I'm like, no, we can drink Coke. She's like, no, you can't. I'm like, no, we can. She said, no, you can't. My husband used to be a member of your church, and his parents don't do that, and I know you can't do it. And I was like, do you have a Coke? And she invited us in. She poured me a Coke, and I drank it. And she was so she could not believe that I had done that. And she sat back in the couch and said, well, if I didn't understand this about your religion, maybe I don't understand lots of things. We taught her, we baptized her, reactivated the husband, and they got sealed all while I was on my mission, all because of these fences that we create that make people believe these things where it's not it. But that's a true story from my mission.
But, there's other things too, like keep the Sabbath day holy. That's, in not only in our scriptures, but in the Old and New Testament, keeping the Sabbath day holy. Well, what does that mean? We can start building fences and say, well, that means we shouldn't be watching TV on Sabbath. Or some people might have another fence that says only Disney. I remember when you could watch Disney, but nothing else on Sundays. And does it mean that you can't? What you can and can't do, we start building these fences. Now, if I need a fence, like walking across that parking lot, if I need a fence to help me keep that a particular law, I don't care which one it is, but if I need a fence, then that's my fence that I need. But I should not judge someone else's righteousness based on my fence.
No, that's exactly right. Like I said, my grandparents never had playing cards in their house. Maybe they needed a fence because maybe my grandfather had a problem with gambling. I don't know. But in my house, we love to play Liverpool Rummy. It's a great, fun family game having nothing to do with gambling. And so maybe I don't need that fence. So yeah, we shouldn't impose our fences if we need them on other people. And we shouldn't create fences for fence's sake.
Yeah, exactly. Because we often end up judging somebody's righteousness based on the fences that we have. And it shouldn't be that. Hot drinks are not for the body. Well, what does that mean? Is there something about hot drinks that's more that's worse for you than the tea or coffee? We don't know those things. So let's keep the law. Sometimes we need to let the scriptures speak for themselves. And if we need a fence, that's all right. We can build that fence, but we should not judge other people's righteousness based on the fences that we need or that we build for ourselves, like the playing cards or the cold Coke. Those are fences. That's really what it comes down to. And so we have to be careful, really careful, about judging other people's righteousness based on the fences that we may have. And we don't want to get to the extent where we have what's kosher in the Mormon church, what's kosher as a member of the church. And, do we eat the wheat? Do we eat the meat? I mean, people can go to all extents and all lengths in the fences that they build around these certain laws and then begin preaching them as doctrine, which is not right. That was one of Christ's statements about the Pharisees there in Matthew 23, I think it is, that they make laws or these fences. They create these laws and these fences that even they can't keep when the time comes. So we just have to be careful about these things.
No, it's true. I often think we have the two great commandments, which, Christ gives us. Almost like a fence around those would be the 10 commandments. Very good, but that's wonderful. But then you see what they did in the Israelite tradition. They had 613 laws that made up that which was a fence around the 10 commandments, essentially. And then, you can just keep going out further and further. They had all the oral tradition and everything else that were trying to just keep people, but in the end, people start adhering to the fences and not understanding the doctrine. They're not really understanding why they're doing it. They're going through the motions, and all of a sudden people go, what am I doing this for? This is silly. This is stupid. Look at the rest of the world. Look how, and because they don't understand why that was even there in the first place. So I'm a big fan of tearing down those fences, understanding the true doctrine, really what's there, and then adhering to that and understanding what that is. And that's one of the things I think I learned from you on that trip.
Yeah, these fences are more connected, even within the Orthodox community today. It's the rabbi that they adhere to. It's the rabbi that they want to listen to that determines the way they dress and how they live the law or keep those 613 commandments. It's come down now to a rabbi. And we even do that to a certain extent. We say, we'll be in a class somewhere and somebody will bring something up and then they'll immediately say, well, Elder so-and-so said. It doesn't matter who it is. We have our favorite rabbis, so to speak, and that we quote and that we look to as authoritative, neglecting the scriptures, which are really the source. And that's where that becomes and should be our source for doctrine when we let the scriptures speak for themselves. So we have to be careful even in choosing who we're going to quote for doctrine, because the prophets have said that they have to rely on scripture for that doctrine. So it's a very interesting concept.
So, Bruce, this has been extremely helpful as kind of an introduction to these fences, to how to look at doctrine, how to look at the gospel in a new context and a new light. That's really what we want to do on this series of videos, is do that. So thanks for joining us today and learning about false traditions. Remember to subscribe so future episodes are easier to find. Thanks for watching.